Hello everyone, welcome to Radically Loved Radio. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest, Amy Morin. Amy is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. Since 2002, she has been counseling children, teens, and adults. Her expertise in mental strength has attracted international attention. Her best-selling book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, is being translated into more than 20 languages. She's got a TED Talk that's had more than 400,000 views. She's been featured in Forbes magazine, Fox News, NBC, Health.com, Oprah.com, Cosmopolitan, Elle. She is a well-known public speaker, and her knowledge expands so much more beyond the things that she's written about. I'm so excited to have her as a guest.
In my therapy office over the years, figured out, some people get better a lot faster. Some people, when they are, no matter what they're going through, whether they are depressed or they're going through a divorce or they have some financial trouble, it seemed to be that some people were much more resilient than others. And part of what I was doing after a while was trying to figure out, well, what is it? What's the secret sauce that makes some people more resilient than other people? And over the years, I just sort of figured out sometimes it's not about what we do, it's about what we don't do. And I'm a social worker, so we are taught and trained to really build on people's strengths. And there's definitely value to that, but sometimes I think you can't ignore those nagging little habits that were holding people back. And so I really wanted to say, well, okay, you do these things really well, and we can build on that, but we also have to look at these other things that are holding you back. And I had never really written down until that day that I, was in emotional turmoil for myself. I'd never really written down that list all in one place. That was the first time I'd ever really seen it. And when I did, I thought, here's this comprehensive list. Sometimes people ask me, did you mean to have 13? Was there a magical reason for coming up with this list that had 13? No, there wasn't. That was just how many things I felt like there were to make a comprehensive list. And it was also personal as well. If you know my story, I wrote it out of a very personal place, and it was all of those things that I'd learned. Okay, if you do these things, then you're not going to be able to be strong.
And and it's such a great way of really encompassing all of those things together. That's why, it really is an incredible work. And for the people that are listening that don't know, there's an awesome TED Talk that Amy does where you can see the story. But can you give the listener just a brief recap of what spawned this book and your story and a little bit of background about that?
Sure. When I had started working as a therapist when I was 23, and it was a big year for me. I had gotten married, and I bought a house. I graduated from grad school, got my first big job, and thought, okay, here we go. And I felt like I was, really had this competitive advantage. I thought, I'm 23, and I've got all this great stuff going on. And during that same year, my mom passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. And that was when it became real to me that I wasn't just teaching other people how to cope with life's troubles, but it was really now about how do I apply that same knowledge and skill to my own life. And so I really became invested in figuring out, well, what makes people mentally strong? How do you get through tough times, whether it is grief or some other sort of problem that you encounter? How do you get through it? And a few years down the road, it was 3 years to the day, in fact, that my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. And then I was really in a place where I thought, well, now what do? I don't have a mom. I don't have a husband anymore. And I'm 26 and I'm widowed. And how do I move forward? How do I still go to work as a therapist now when my own life's in turmoil and help other people with their problems? And this really became real to me to say, okay, well, this is my time to figure out how do I be strong? How do I grieve? Which is really about going through the pain. We tend to want to go around pain, or we want to do anything we can to escape it, but I knew I had to go through it. So I said, how do I go through it so that in the end I'll be okay someday? And I didn't want to rush. I did want to rush through it, but I knew that if I did, it wasn't going to be helpful. But I'd seen so many people who were grieving, and they'd come in my office 30 years after they'd lost somebody, but it was still like it happened just yesterday. And it was so hard for them to talk about. So I said, I really want to make sure that I grieve in a way that's healing so that I can be okay someday, and really had to figure out how do I do that, and how do you tolerate being so sad and angry and upset and all of those uncomfortable emotions that come with grief. And And I held out hope. I said, okay, someday life could get better. And I was fortunate that it did. I met Steve a few years later. It was about the time where I had figured I'll just be single for the rest of my life. I wasn't interested in dating, and I was sort of okay with saying, well, that's fine. I can still live a fun, adventurous life. And then, of course, how life works, here comes Steve, and fell in love, got married again, and I thought, oh, this is great. It's my new chapter in life. And almost as quickly as we got married, his dad was diagnosed with cancer, and it was prostate cancer. So they said, well, he'll die of something else. It's slow growing, and you don't have to be all that concerned about it because there's medication. There's lots of options to treat it. We can't cure it, but it will probably be able to treat it. But sure enough, they weren't. And within a few months, we got the word that it was terminal. And my father-in-law and I had grown very close, and he, become like a substitute parent to me. And I thought, I don't want to lose somebody else. Why does this have to happen to me? This isn't fair. All those sorts of things. But I realized, okay, you can't think like this. This isn't particularly helpful to you at that moment. So I sat down and I wrote a list of what mentally strong people don't do. And I said, I'll publish it to the web, see what happens. If it helps me, maybe it could help somebody else. And within a matter of days, it went crazy viral. It got 10 million views. Forbes picked it up, and it became their most viral article of all time. It's gone on at Business Insider. It got 10 million views there. And then I got the opportunity to write a book. But before I knew it, there was, the news was calling. I was on Fox News, and people were asking me, hey, how do you know about mental strength? And I wasn't in a space to tell people the story. My father-in-law had actually just died 4 days before that. And so people said, oh, how do you know about this? And I just kind of gave a story about, well, I'm a therapist and I know these things. But the real story was my life was in complete turmoil, and I had written that as a letter to myself. And I'm thankful now that I had the opportunity to write a book to explain the story behind why I wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, wow. that's
it was never my intention, I just wrote this 600-word article. And that was never my intention to write a book, and I certainly never thought, I'd be talking about it years later, but sometimes you just never know.
Yeah, well, I think that's what happens when you write something so sincere and so genuine and from a place of real substantial heart feeling, from that place of just, this is like the rawness of the grief and the sadness and all of these things and all of the stuff that you want to focus on instead of focus on, this whole idea of like, the feeling sorry for yourself type of thing. You were able to like create this manifesto, really, right? That can...
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sometimes people will say, well, it's like an overnight success. You wrote this one article, it went viral, and you got a book deal. But that's not really how it went. I'd been writing articles for lots of places on the web for years. But as a therapist, I was usually very careful to write things that were quite clinical. Maybe it wouldn't offend anybody, and I tried to stick to the facts. This was one of those rare articles where, like, I didn't care. I wasn't, worrying about offending anybody or saying something that somebody might take offense to. It was just really from the heart, and of course, that's the one that went crazy viral.
Right. Well, can you tell me what it was like to talk to these people when they were interviewing you as you were going through this process? Like, what was that like?
It was an insane time in my life. So I wrote the original article just before Thanksgiving, and then by the next, I think it was about 2 days after I wrote it, Forbes contacted me and said, hey, we just reprinted your list to our website. And I thought, I wasn't even excited about it because, we were really nearing the end of my father-in-law's life, and I knew that. And some of the first people who read my article didn't particularly like it, so I was starting to get some hate mail from people, and I thought, this is really what I want to deal with. And then when it blew up to the point that it was crazy, I would look at the Forbes article, and every time I would refresh my screen, 10,000 more people had read it. And it was a few seconds later, I'd hit the refresh button, and it was another round of 10,000 people reading it. And I just couldn't comprehend, like, how many people in the world are reading this. And then, throughout it all, then when people would ask me, how did you come up with this? Or I am sitting on, Forbes said, hey, we want to interview you on camera to talk about this. And I had told Forbes, they knew the story, but I said, I'm not going to talk about it on camera. I'm not going to open the floodgates on while you have a camera on me, because
Right.
going through all of this, I just too raw. I can't talk about it, but a lot of the other people didn't know the story either. And then it got picked up. Rush Limbaugh talked about it, and Glenn Beck talked about it, and it was just kept going around and around. And then a literary agent called and said, "You should write a book about this." And I didn't even tell her that there was a story behind it. I just said, "Yeah, maybe." And
You're like, I'll think about it.
well, that's just it, right? Like, I was like, yeah, whatever. But I was in a place, where we were really focused on our family and how do we, go forward, and now we're planning a funeral, and all at the same time, this, crazy stuff was happening. So it was bizarre experience. And then by January, so I wrote that at Thanksgiving time, and by the 1st of January, we had a book deal with HarperCollins. And so it was this incredibly strange time in my life, a month and a half of just really, the best of times and the worst of times all at once.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's it. That's so much for, one person to be able to deal with, so you at this point have had the support of Steve, right? While you guys were going through this process. Right. So that I'm sure was a huge help for you to be able to show up to the public now, because it's almost like, we need you now, your clients need you. And it's like this thing where, you need to show up and be able to bring these things to the world now, right? So it maybe propels a different type of process, or a different type of courage to be strong now for the general public, right?
Yeah, I wasn't even, it was probably a couple of weeks. I had gone out to lunch with some friends, and they said, "Well, are you going to tell your story?" And I was like, "Oh," and I didn't want to. And I didn't even tell the literary agent until it was probably close to Christmas time before I said to her, "Hey, I have this story, but I'm a therapist. I listen to people's stories. I don't tell my own story." I said, "Do I have to tell it?" And she said, "Well, no, you don't have to, but you might want to." Mm-hmm. And I was really, and then I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to write a book on mental strength, then I guess I should probably be strong enough to be able to say, "Hey, look, and this is what happened to me too," and tell my story. I'm so thankful I did now, but that was scary. I'm a really private person in general, so to tell anything about my story, in fact, the first draft of the book probably had about 3 sentences of my life, and my editor very kindly said, "Maybe you could put some more color into this." So I added a few more sentences, and she's like, "No, the introduction needs to be the story." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And so now I'm glad that I told it, rather than, I feel like I was keeping a huge secret if nobody knew the story behind it. But I'm thankful that I did, and I've had plenty of people say that's helpful to know that you've been there too, that you didn't just come up with these magically as a therapist, but that you know what it's like to be, at the bottom of the barrel too.
Yeah, and I think that, it helps us kind of connect to how we relate to that. There's so many things in this book that, I found such a deep connection to, and, the different stories. But one thing that came up for me a lot was, all of them, all 13 applied, but I'm a coach, so I work with people, and I refer people out a lot. And this is a lot of these sort of qualities are things that are so useful for us to begin to practice and to begin to learn. I think one of the biggest ones for me was, don't worry about pleasing everyone. That was huge, right? Because just of working in an industry of wellness and health, and creating space for people, as a yoga teacher, as a meditation guide, as a coach, you're and a writer, right? So I'm not always going to be able to please everyone with the stuff that I bring to the table, and that's okay. And this is something that I try to instill in my my coaching clients. It's okay. You don't always have to please everyone. And the other thing that really stood out for me was the dwelling on the past and the feeling sorry for ourselves, right? That's the other thing. And I think that this is why it was so key, and I found that your story was so powerful, because again, this is another thing that causes this sort of blockade for us to move forward. And like you said, like you were moving through the grief, not around it. And so many times we try to do things to placate our emotions and to not actually go through them, but instead to, you know, we do all of these things, you know, we self-medicate, we deviate, we continue to avert from actually dealing with the process of being sad, you know. So anytime I find myself in a position where I'm with someone who's dealing with grief or loss or really struggling with something in their life, it's like, well, just, you know, be where you are. Like, just allow yourself to be present where you are and with what you're doing. And, you know, so much of what you speak to is about that, right? It's about just being where you are and allowing yourself to not, you know, be afraid of taking risks and, you know, like all of these different things. So, I think that, you know, what I'd like to do is actually get your opinion on that. And you work with your patients in regard to that. I'm sure a lot of what you deal with is people just, you know, that dwelling on the past bit, or, you know, not moving out of their story, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And, you know, I think we all tend to look for the short-term, quick solutions. We all want quick fixes. So, and there's so much about happiness these days, and people put so much pressure on themselves thinking, well, I should be happy. And it's, you know, that type of mindset that keeps you from being happy, and that you're not going to be happy all the time, and that it's okay to be sad. But we're so uncomfortable with our emotions sometimes that we'll do just about anything to cheer ourselves up, even if it's a quick fix. So whether somebody says, you know, I'm going to drink because that helps, or I'm going to just jump into another relationship right now because that will make me feel better today. But then we tend to create even more long-term problems for ourselves, and we need to really look at the long term. What's going to make you happy? Or maybe exercising isn't what you want to do right now, but it boosts your mood. There's plenty of research that shows it makes you happier, but it might not make you happier in the moment when you're in pain and you're thinking, this is stupid and I don't want to do it anymore. And so to figure out, well, sometimes you got to have those tough times. You got to go through hard things in life and let yourself feel that. And that's okay. It's okay to be sad, or it's okay to be angry. And I find so many people will say, you know, it's the anger's bad, or they think, you know, I shouldn't be angry, but anger's not the enemy. It's okay to be mad. A lot of really good things in life have come because somebody got angry and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, or I don't want to deal with this anymore. And that's okay, but it's all about what you do with those emotions. You know, the behaviors that you choose when you're feeling something is really quite telling. And I always tell people, if you want to change how you feel, you have to change how you behave and change how you think. But that sometimes it's to know it's okay to be in a bad mood, or it's okay to be sad today, but you just don't want to get stuck that way. So if you're stuck in a bad spot in life, then you have to say, well, what am I going to do to change my mood? And to really find out, where's that line? You don't want to feel sorry for yourself, for example, that it's okay to feel sad when something bad happens, but self-pity is not the same thing. It's really when you start to think, you know, nobody else is dealing with as many problems. My life is so much worse. Poor me. That's what keeps you stuck. So it's really about finding that fine line of, you know, it's okay to feel bad, and then to say, well, do I need to do something about it? And if so, how do I get out of this?
Yeah, and I think that the other, to your point, it's like, you know, when we start feeling bad about ourselves, but then it's the downward spiral, then it's like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy. And then it turns, like one thing can domino effect into this place that it takes you all the way down, right? It's like that perpetual cycle where it's like, then it just creates a long-term sadness. Then at that point, you're just sad or upset.
That's it exactly. And to figure out, how do you break that cycle? Because you start thinking really negative thoughts, makes you feel worse, and then the worse you feel, the less you do to make your life better, which then reinforces those negative thoughts, and it just goes around and around, and you have to figure out, well, how do I break this cycle? Well, usually it means doing something different, even if you don't feel like it. Maybe you just want to sit at home, or you don't want to get up off the couch, but you just have to trust that doing something different is the best thing for you, to go out and say, okay, well, what's one thing I could do today to make my life just a little bit better? And when you start doing that, even though you don't feel like it, but you start taking the action, that's what really changes your life and gets you out of that negative cycle.
What's like something that someone can do if they're like stuck in that sort of that process of they just don't feel like, say somebody's listening to this right now and they're like wanting to just feel better because they're just feeling really bad about themselves or they're really down. What's something that they can do to begin the process of getting out of that cycle?
I'm a big fan of doing behavior experiments, and so we call it acting as if. So if you're really sad, to say, well, what would I be doing if I were happy today? Maybe if you were happy, you'd be calling your friends, or you'd be going out for a walk, or you'd, be planting flowers in your garden, whatever it might be. But to say, what is it I'd be doing? And then you go do that, even though you don't feel like it. Or I work with people, say, who have social anxiety, and they'll say, I'm going to this event, and I don't want to go, and I'm really anxious. And we say, well, what would you do when you get there? Well, normally I go sit in a corner because I don't want to talk to anybody. Well, then what happens? Well, then nobody talks to me. And then what happens? Well, then I think, I'm a social outcast. So we say, well, what would you do if you were an outgoing and friendly and confident person? Well, I'd walk up to people and I'd talk to them. So what if you acted like that anyway, even though you don't feel it? What if you just went and did it? And then people will say, well, then people will probably talk to me back. Oh, okay. And so it's really about figuring out, how do you act as if? So to say, what's the feeling I want to have, and what would I be doing if I felt that way right now? And then to go do it anyway. If you lead with your behavior, sometimes the feelings will follow.
I love that. That's a great practice to do, because it really works. I mean, I've done it myself, where I've been feeling like, if I was feeling sad about something or really upset, and it's like, okay, it's just the downward spiral, of, okay, now I feel like this, and now I feel like this, and now I'm just sitting at home, like eating bags of popcorn and spoonfuls of peanut butter, and I'm just going to sit here and watch Netflix all day, and why do I feel like this,
Exactly. Right.
And so usually the quick fix is just going outside. I mean, for me, that's like the thing that works right away. It's like just getting up or moving my body, and typically it's the downward spiral. Like things start to go awry the minute that I'm not doing something that's part of my norm, like I wake up every morning, I meditate, I practice yoga, like I go and I teach my classes and I see clients, or I teach my classes, and then I just, I walk my dogs, I spend some time with my sweetie, or, I go read a book, or, something to kind of fuel that part of me that's like, oh, okay, like I can just take a beat, I can take a moment, and it feels good to do, or I'll go see a movie, or call a friend, or do something. But it's like those moments where I'm just really busy, and then one thing starts to fall away, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, and it's like so many things need to be done. I don't want to do any of it. It's so much easier to just stay at home and not do any of it, So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really great. Thank you for that. I also want to talk about that. So the fear of being alone. I really like what you wrote about, being happy being alone, right? Because I find personally, I work with a lot of people all the time. Like I go teach classes with large groups of people, and I enjoy being alone. I don't feel lonely. And, because there's all these things and I feel connected to where I'm at. But sometimes there are those moments where I do feel that loneliness, and I'm like, well, should I go out and be with people? Like there's, this whole feeling of maybe disconnection, right? Can you?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people who will say, well, I'm comfortable being alone. That's not a problem for me. But then when I'll ask them, well, what do you do when you're alone? Well, I'm texting my friends, or, on Facebook, and say, well, how long? I think it's important to say, how do you set aside time to just be alone with your thoughts sometimes? Mm-hmm. And even if it's just 10 minutes a day, our lives are just so busy and so full of social noise, and there's stuff going on constantly. But to sit and just think for 10 minutes can be really instrumental to your life. They did a study where they asked people, would you rather be alone with your thoughts for 15 minutes or submit yourselves to an electric shock? And 25% of women opted for the electric shock.
Are you serious?
And then when they asked, Right. And then they ask men, and 75% of men opt for the electric shock. And I think that is quite telling about, our society these days, and that, to sit in, I think we tend to think, well, it's a waste of time to sit and do nothing, or, I need to be productive, or I need to be hustling. And there's definitely a lot of value to being socially engaged with people. We need to have friends, and not just Facebook friends, but real life friends, and you need to be interacting with people. But you also need time to yourself to think, okay, how am I doing in life, and where do I fit in, and how are my goals? Am I making progress or not, or am I going to change some of my goals, or how am I doing as far as living according to my values, or my priorities in order? Lots of stuff like that if you never set time aside to just think about, it just kind of gets away from you. And before you know it, you're all, well, what am I doing here? And just time to reflect. So I always encourage people, just take a few minutes a day, even if you can just spare 10 minutes to just say, I'm going to sit and just think about things. Your brain needs time to just process things and work through things, and to really evaluate how you're doing and where you're going and what do you want to be different in your life.
Yeah, I love that. That's true. Especially now in society, like the way that we're constantly, you know, constantly swamped by information, social media and, you know, whatever you're doing with your career, like it's just constant information, like media outlets, like everything that's causing, that sort of depletion of energy. And I think it's really interesting how women chose that and not the men, you know? And I'm curious if you think that perhaps maybe because now we're taking more prominent roles in society, and I feel that, more women are garnering more powerful roles, and it's like we're creating this whole like independence and equality, and we're so driven now, we're so independent now, and I'm wondering if that's sort of, that could be a reasoning behind why that study showed that.
Yeah, I think there is so much pressure on women these days to do everything, right? They're still supposed to do, to be there for the kids as a primary caretaker, but then so many women also want to be the primary breadwinner, or to go out and have a successful career, but then there's that pressure that you need to be super mom too. And I think that it's just being felt that, like, how do you take time out for yourself? And I talk to so many women that will be like, well, I feel selfish if I were to take 10 minutes of my day. Mm-hmm. Really, 10 minutes of your day you feel selfish to just have some quiet time? But I talk to so many women that will say that, or they'll just say, I can't. There's literally not a spare moment in my day. Or they'll say, my time to myself is when I'm doing the laundry, or when I'm, driving to pick my kid up from soccer practice. That's the only spare minute I have in the day. And I think that that's sad. I think it's really telling of how busy we are today. And I think we really confuse sometimes being busy with being productive. And we tend to think as long as you're always moving, it means you're busy. But sometimes the best way to be more productive is to just slow down and take time out for yourself.
Yeah. And I think that part of that process is like how we want, what is it? Like, we want automatic satisfaction, right? We want to see the result, instant gratification. That's the word I was looking for, and just in general, like in society, we're kind of traveling on this fast track, with technology and just where we are in life, so and I say that especially for us women, because we think that we need to be so much further than we are. That's been my sort of experience with, my students and the people that I work with. It's always like this, there's not enough time, or why am I not, at this advanced level yet? Or how come I don't understand these things yet? Or why am I still not losing weight, why am I still, all of these things. And it's like, we want that sort of instant gratification, and we forget that it's a process, right? It's a long-term type of thing, to be able to take the time and give ourselves the space to watch the slow progression to create sustainability, as opposed to doing something quickly or not having enough time because it's like there's just so many things to do. I think that kind
it's
of...
an issue
Oh, go
I
ahead.
tackle in my therapy office all the time. People will come in and they'll say, okay, therapy's not working. I've been here for 3 weeks, and my 10 years of depression isn't cured yet. And it's to tell them, well, okay, I know you can order something online in a split second, and you get to do a lot of things. And like these days, you don't have to wait for commercials anymore. And we live in a sort of fast forward culture. But when it comes to your own life and making change within yourself, it's not going to happen that fast. I don't have any magic wands, and there aren't any shortcuts that are healthy that are really going to get rid of certain bad habits or going to help you cultivate new ones or to improve your mental health overnight or anything like that. But I think that so many people just feel like, they're sprinting through life so fast, and then it just feels like, well, it's been 3 weeks. Why aren't I feeling any better? Because it feels like it's taking so long already.
Or have you ever worked with a patient that you had one session with them, they were like, I'm fixed, everything's great?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Plenty of people that will be like, oh, I just needed to talk about that. And I think sometimes that's it. Some people have carried around something and they just really wanted to get out their chest, and that's really all they needed. Or other people, though, they're like, oh, is that all I have to do in life, is do all of these things? No problem. And, they walk out the door very confident that they're going to go out and change the world. And maybe they do. I hope that they do. But I also get plenty of them that will call back and be like, oh, okay, that didn't go quite as smoothly as I thought.
Well, that's part of what you talk about too, is like not expecting immediate results, right?
Right, and to know that, progress doesn't always come in that straight line that we hope that it would. So often it's the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and people will be like, well, I messed up. I'm all the way back to where I was in the beginning. And it's really about coaching them to know that you can mess up and you can make mistakes, but it doesn't mean that you haven't made any progress at all. It's how you respond to those mistakes and how you recover when whether you ate a cupcake when you were on a diet thinking you weren't going to eat sugar, or whether, you took some sort of a shortcut and then it didn't work out for you, and you say, okay, well, how do I not make that mistake again? And to really turn those things into a learning opportunity rather than thinking you're a failure.
Right. Oh, I love that, Amy. That's awesome. That's so great. That's so great. So what can we expect from Amy in the next coming months?
Good question. I'm working on my next book right now, which is 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do.
Oh.
And that will come out in the fall of 2017. The biggest question I was getting from readers was, how do we help kids now? How do we help kids become mentally strong so they don't grow up to be 40 years old and then try to learn this stuff? How do we teach it to them now? So we thought one of the best ways was if we can teach parents how to teach kids, then that can be instrumental in getting this information out there. So there's that, and in the meantime, I just keep writing for Forbes and Inc. and Psychology Today, and have an e-course on mental strength. I had a lot of people asking about what else can I do? Now that I read your book, I'm hungry for more. So we created an e-course to give people a more interactive experience with exercises and some more firsthand ideas of how do I apply these things to my life to become stronger.
That's really great, and I'm definitely going to link that with this podcast when we publish it. There'll be a link for that. So for people that want to explore that, that's awesome that you're doing the e-courses. It'll allow for more people to have access to it. So that's really cool. So just a few questions in closing. Number 1, what are you grateful for?
Oh, boy. I guess I'm grateful for all of the lovely people that I have in my life, those I've met and those I haven't. Since writing this book, I get emails from strangers that tell me their story. And I think I can't even explain it other than to say I'm incredibly grateful for people that are willing to come back and tell me, thank you, but also people that are just willing to share their stories. That's why I love being a therapist as well. But just to know that there's so many people out there giving it their best makes me incredibly grateful.
Oh, that's so great. And what inspires you?
Hmm. I guess the lesson that I've learned is that life is short and you never know when your number might be up. So I guess I'm inspired to make every day the very best that I can.
No, that's really great. Another great one, Amy. You're